테스트. 하나, 둘, 셋. 어, 2022년 12월 14일 오전 1시 19분 넬리오 방송 시작합니다. 미치겠다. 일단은 방송을 시작하기에 앞서서 늦어서 죄송합니다. 자고 온다고 왔는데 아직 잠에서 덜 깨서 해롱해롱 했나봐요. 코디님, 네라 안녕하세요. 네라 안녕하세요. 순서치네. 대행님 수문서치 감사합니다. 잠깐만요. 나 약간 아직 정신 못 차렸나 봐요, 사실. 아, 일단은 물 좀 마시고 정신 차리고 배경음 얼른 켜고 어, 아, 아, 아,
제형은 알코올
잠깐만요.
토해도
광고
될 것
멈춰.
같은데 바르고
광고 멈춰.
나면
광고 멈춰.
보들보들하고 매끈해져요.
아니, 왜 광고 중에는 뮤트가 안 되는 거지? 어이가 없네. 여러분, 방금 안 사실인데요. 작은 창에서는 뮤트가 안 돼요. 우와, 이 자식들 사악하다. 노아님, 내라 안녕하세요. 이제는 자라가 봅니다. 안녕히 주무세요. 잘 자요. 바이바이. My neck fall out. Oh, your neck fall out while you were reading my streaming. Oh my gosh, no. Put your neck back. Yeah, you got it. You got it. Well, but it's not gonna be that long, cause like I'm not gonna read a lot of literacy. I'm just gonna read a little bit. Uh, 어, 유다이 뜨나고요? 잠깐, 맞다, 여기 유다이. 여기 막 생각해보니까 소리만 나고 효과가 안 나지? 미안해요. 소리만 나고 효과는 안 나왔는 걸 생각을 못했다. 미안해요. 그리고 뭐지? 오늘 방송을, 그니까 뭐지, 이거, 뭐라고 해야 되니, 이거를. 그, 하기 전에, 그니까 이제 뭐지? 이거 지금 원래 하기로 한 그게 있잖아요. 데스백칭님 어서오세요. 네라네라 안녕하세요. 오늘 원래 하기로 한 게 있는데 그거를 하기 전에 좀 급하게 가져온 감이 없잖아 있는데, 하면 이제 여러분들은 같이 좀 보면 재밌지 않을까 싶어서 갖고 온 게 있거든요. 잠깐만, 채티 이거를 조금 살짝 이쪽으로 옮겨주고, 여러분들도 좀 이쪽으로 같이 옮겨주고, 여러분들도 이쪽으로 같이 옮겨주고, 그 다음에 하나 둘 셋, 짜잔. 이게 뭐냐고 여쭤보시는 분들이 계신다면 이제 대답해드리는 게 인지상정. 이제 잠깐만요. 이거 그냥 이거보다는 이게 더 나을 수도 있겠다. 잠시만요. 정신없어. 정신없어. 미안해요. 윈도우 캡처. 이제 트위치에서 메일을 하나 보내줬단 말이에요. 이런 식으로 이제 2020년, 22년에 내 방송은 어땠냐? 라는 테마로 뭔가 왔는데 여러분들이랑 같이 보면 괜찮을 것 같아서 들고 와봤어요, 한번. 많이 웃었습니다. 새로운 기록을 달성했죠. 엘든링에 빠져버렸고요. 아, 되게 틀린 말은 아니라서 뭐라 말을 못하겠는데, 그래서 여러분들이랑 이제 올해 방송 돌아보기 같은 느낌으로 같이 보면 괜찮지 않을까 싶어서 갖고 왔어요. 많이 웃었습니다. 새로운 기록을 달성했죠. 엘든링에 빠져버렸고요. 아, 엘든링을 많이 하긴 했지. 트위치 커뮤니티와 1년 내내 함께 노력한 모든 일들이 결실해졌어요. 유저 여러분이 있기에 트위치가 존재합니다. 이거 살짝 감동인데. 생방송 219회 시청한 시간 여러분들이 본 시간인 거겠죠? 조금님 내라 안녕하세요. 미니마니모님 어서오세요. 내라 지각 아프다. 하지만 이미 지각한 거 맞아요. 저 지각했어요. 하지만 죄송합니다. 약간 뻔뻔하게 못하겠어. 지각고는 그래서 이런 메일이 왔단 말이에요. 이게 시청자용으로도 와요. 그러니까 내가 시청자로서 어떻게 했는지, 시청자로서 이제 누구 방송을 많이 봤는지 그런 거를 많이 보여준단 말이야. 지금 인기 이모지 쓴 거라든가 내가 얼만큼 시청을 했다던가 이제 채널 포인트를 총 얼마를 모았다든가 이런 거를 확인을 할 수 있단 말이야. 즐겨 찾는 스트리머야 이런 것도 나오네. 그리고 이쪽이 이제 스트리머, 이제 내가 스트리머로서 트위치에 이룬 업적이라고 해야 되나? 오늘 본방 하기 전에 이것 좀 보고 있었어요. 여러분들이랑. 그래서 지금 이쪽 말로는 죽여버렸어. 너무해. 그래서 이쪽에서 이제 스트리머로서 이제 어떻게 했는지 좀 여러분이랑 같이 보면 재밌을 것 같아서 왔어요. 219면 365에서 219 나누면 얼마지? 0.6인가? 아닌가? 잠깐만요. 아닌가? 0.6 좀 되지 않나요? 아닌가? 365일 중에 219회는 몇 번이지? 어떻게 내가 굳었어요? 이게 맞나? 싶긴 한데 네. 보자. 올해 커뮤니티와 함께 생방송을 219회 진행하면서 수많은 추억을 쌓으셨어요. 저희는 모두가 스트리머님의 방송 중 동시 접속한 시청자 수가 132명에 달했던 올해 가장 큰 방송에 대해서 계속 이야기하고 있어요. 올해 동시 동접자가 132명이 최대였다 라는 이야기인 거겠죠. 최고 CCV가 뷰어가 했는데 CC가 뭔지 머리가 안 굴러간다. 어떡하니? C 여러분의 커뮤니티도 함께 성장했어요. 여기서 말하는 커뮤니티가 이제 저를 봐주시는 분들을 통칭하는 말인 거겠죠. 새로운 정기 구독자 98명 98분 새 팔로워 와우 많이 늘었다 해도 그래도 괜찮은데요. 채널 포인트 389만 와 채널 포인트가 총 389만 쌓였다고? 채팅 메시지 11만 와 이렇게 보니까 세상 야 쩐다. 인기 이모지 응원하는 거 많이 쓰고 되게 잘 보이네요. 약간 어떤 패턴으로 쓰이는지. 시청자들은 진정으로 Now you cheer move 한 기분을 느꼈고 아 이모지가 기분을 나타내는 거니까 이모션을 나타내는 거니까 그렇긴 하겠다. 채널 포인트 3만 아이고 나 잠깐만요 389만 4,838 야 커뮤니티에서 스트리머님들의 채널에 정기 구독권 73개를 선물해요. 사랑을 전해주도록 도와줬어요. 정기 구독권 선물 73개를 보내주신 이제 여러분들 감사합니다. 인기 카테고리 이터널 리턴 엘든링 이거 지금 여기서 이제 저체 빠지고 내가 어디 갔니? 여기서 이제 저체 빠지고 다크소울 들어가면 이거 저번 주 생일 방송 때 했던 그 라인업인데 완전 이터널 리턴 카테고리를 주제로 아주 활발하게 방송을 진행하셨네요. 해당 카테고리에서 방송하는 전체 스트리머 중 상위 5%에 도달했어요. 총 팔로워 15,000, 1,500. 와, 순서로는 달성했구나. 1,500. 이거는 제가 지금 텐션이 좀 낮은 관계로 이제 나중에 정규 본방 한번 할 때 이제 한 번 더 올해 리뷰하는 과정에서 한 번 더 보는 걸로 하지 알겠습니다. 네. 뿅. 뿅. 짠. 다시 불러오고 슉. 얼팍 공격 얼팍샷. 아 이거 윙크가 안 된다. 잠깐만요. 아 진짜 이제 그러면 원래 하기로 했던 본방 해보도록 하겠습니다. 일단은 뭔가 약간 예전에 솔직히 말해도 과제의 목적도 있는데 뭔가 뭐라고 해야 되지? 약간 이렇게 말하긴 그런데 여러분들 제 영어 발음 좋아하고 제가 뭔가 솔직히 말해서 게임 실력보다는 목소리가 매력적이라고 느껴서 오시는 분들이 계신다고 저는 생각을 하거든요. 그리고 저는 그렇게 제가 재밌다고 생각을 하네요. 갑자기 자아성찰을 하면서 좀 뼈 아프긴 한데 둘 다 좋아요? 감사합니다. 시마님 어서오세요. 네라네라 안녕하세요. 그래서 좀 방금 스스로 좀 뼈 때리는 시간을 가져봤는데요. 그래서 뭔가 여러분들이 나를 특히나 좋아하는 요소가 뭘지 생각을 해보면서 그러면 나 저를 좋아하는 요소 두 가지를 좀 같이 쓸 수 있을 만한 콘텐츠가 뭐가 있을까 하면서 제 투수 라이프를 돌아보는 시간을 가졌단 말이에요. 저는 요즘 좀 방송을 뭐라 해야 되지? 이제 들으면서 뭔가 그냥 약간 오디오를 그러니까 듣는 방송을 많이 하게 돼요. 요즘 들어서. 그래서 그러면 뭔가 듣는 방송 좀 보는 방송 말고 듣는 방송 느낌으로 한번 방송 기획해보자 해서 생각난 게 네, 지금 오늘 영어원서 읽기 방송입니다. 저도 오늘 갑자기 레비아님들아 제로다님들아 안녕하세요. 갑자기 랭킹 그렇게 매겨지니까 좀 당황하긴 했어요. 당황은 하지만 시작했어요. 잠깐만요. 그러면 일단은 오늘 읽기로 한 소설에 대해서 이야기를 드리자면, 일단은 말했듯이 원서가 될 예정이고요. 단편 하나랑 좀 뭐라 해야 되지? 중편 일부, 그리고 단편 2개, 중편 살짝 잘라온 거 하나, 네, 준비해왔고요. 혹시 작품명 궁금하신 분들은 질문해 주시면 대답해 드리겠습니다. 따로 기재를 안 해두는 게, 이게 지금 뭐지? 3편 다 한국어로 출판이 되었는지를 확인을 제가 못 해갖고, 이게, 예, 그래서 제가, 그거 만약에 여쭤보시는 분 계시면 그거를 확인을 해드리고 대답을 해드리도록 하겠습니다. 한국어로도 볼 수 있도록 나중에. 음, 일단은 첫 뭐지? 어디 갔지? 네, 그러면 지금부터 그냥 별말 안 하고 그냥 그냥 이렇게 그냥 소설 낭독할 거니까 그냥 들어주시면 감사하겠습니다. 감사합니다. 나중에 이거 유튜브로 올려야지. 잠깐만. 지게 오케이 확인. 어우야 잠깐만. 예. 자고 나서 그런가? 기지기가 잘 되네요. 오케이, let's go. 소리도 좀 줄여봐야겠다. 아, a worm. 잠깐만요. A worm pass. 방금 뭐 허리 부서지는 소리가 났는데. 아닙니다. 허리 안 부서졌습니다. 부서진 건 다행히도 아직 아무것도 없네요. 네, 그러면 A worm pass. 그리고 그냥 뭐지, 한 작품 읽을 때마다 잠깐 쉬는 시간 가지고 다음 작품 읽는 느낌으로 이거 유하 올릴지 말지 모르니까 아직까지는. A worm pass. 시바이크. 됐다. 뭐야? 왜 이래? 잠깐만요. 멈췄다. 잠깐만요. 잠깐만, 지금 캠 프로그램 멈추는 건 조금 버그인데 이거? 우와, 새하얗다. 우와, 에반데? 뭐지? 억가하는 건가? 뭐지? 억가 당하나 봐요. 저 잠깐만요. 이게 맞나? 음, 짠, 됐다. 잠깐 이슈가 있었어요. 오케이, let's go. 진짜 또 다른 이슈 안 났으면 좋겠는데. 됐나? 오케이 됐다. A worm pass. Eudora Welty, from the collected works of Eudora Welty. It was December, a bright frozen day in the early morning. Far out in the country, there was an old Negro woman with her head tied in red rag, coming along a path through the pine woods. Her name was Phoenix Jackson. She was a very old and small, and she would walk slowly in the dark pine shadows, moving a little from side to side in her steps with the balanced heaviness and lightness of a pendulum in a grandfather clock. She carried a thin, small cane made from an umbrella, and with this she kept tapping the frozen earth in front of her. This made a grave and persistent noise in the still air that seemed meditative, like the chirping of a solitary little bird. She wore a dark striped dress reaching down to her shoe tops and an equally long apron of bleached sugar sacks with a full pocket, all neat and tidy. But every time she took a step, she might have fallen over her shoelaces, which dragged from her unlaced shoes. She looked straight ahead. Her eyes were blue with age. Her skin had a pattern all its own of numberless branching, wrinkles and as thoughts, and as though a whole little tree stood in the middle of her forehead. But a golden color ran underneath, and the two knobs of her cheeks were illumined by a yellow burning under the dark. Under the red rag, her hair came down on her neck in the frailest of ringlets, still black, and it was an odor, like copper. Now and then there was a quivering in the thicket. Old Phoenix said, "Out of my way, all you foxes, owls, beetles, jackrabbits, coons, and wild animals. Keep out from under these feet, little bob whites. Keep the big wild hogs out of my path. Don't let none of those come running my direction. I got a long way." Under her small black freckled hand, her cane, limber as a buggy whip, would switch at the brush as if to rouse up any hiding things. On she went. The woods were deep and still. The sun made the pine needles almost too bright to look at. Up where the wind rocked, the cones dropped as light as feathers. Down in the hollow was the mourning dove. It was not too late for him. The path ran up a hill. Seemed like there was chains about my feet. Time I get this far, she said, in the voice of argument old people kept to use with themselves. Something always take a hold of me on this hill. Please, I should say. 아이고야 목마르다. After she got to the top, she turned and gave a full, severe look behind her where she had come. Up through pines, she said at length. Now down through oaks. Her eyes opened their widest and she started down gently. But before she got to the bottom of the hill, a bush caught her dress. Her fingers were busy and intent, but her skirts were full and long, so that before she could pull them free in one place, they were caught in another. It was not possible to allow the dress to tear. In the thorny bush, she said. Thorns, you doing your appointed work. Never want to let folks pass. No, sir. Old eyes thought you was a pretty little green bush. Finally, trembling all over, she stood free, and after a moment dared to stoop for her cane. Sun so high, she cried, leaning back and looking, while the sick tears went over her eyes. The time getting all gone here. At the foot of this hill was a place where a log was laid across the creek. Now comes the trial, said Phoenix. Putting her right foot out, she mounted the log and shut her eyes, lifting her skirt, leveling her cane fiercely before her. Like a festival figure in some parade, she began to march across. Then she opened her eyes and she was safe on the other side. I wasn't as old as I thought, she said. But she sat down to rest. She spread her skirts on the bank around her and folded her hands over her knees. Up above her was a tree purely clad of mistletoe. She did not dare to close her eyes, and when a little boy brought her a plate with a slice of marble cake on, she spoke to him. That would be acceptable, she said. But when she went to take it, there was just her own hand in the air. So she left that tree and had to go through a barbed wire fence. There she had to creep and crawl, spreading her knees and stretching her fingers like a baby trying to climb their steps. But she talked loudly to herself. She could not let her dress be torn now so late in the day, and she could not pay for having her arm or her leg sawed off if she got caught fast where she was. At last, she was safe through the fence and rising up out in the clearing. Big dead trees, like black men with one arm, were standing in the purple stalks of the withered cotton field. There sat a buzzard. Who are you watching? In the furrow she made her way along, glad this not the season of for bulls, she said, looking sideways. And the good Lord made his snakes to curl up and sleep in the winter. A pleasure I don't see no two-headed snake coming around that tree where it come once. It took a while to get by him back in the summer. She passed through the old cotton and went into a field of dead corn. It whispered and shook and was taller than her head. Through the maze now, she said, for there was no path. Then there was something tall, black, and skinny there, moving before her. At first, she took it for a man. It could have been a man dancing in the field, but she stood still and listened, and it did not make a sound. It was as silent as a ghost. Ghost, she said sharply. Who be you the ghost of? for I have heard of nary deaths close by. But there was no answer, only the rag dancing in the wind. She shut her eyes, reached out her hand, and touched a sleeve. She found a coat, and inside that an emptiness cold as ice. "You scarecrow," she said. Her face lighted. "I ought to be shut up for good," she said, with laughter. "My senses is gone. I too old. I, the oldest people I ever know. Dance, old scarecrow," she said, "while I'm dancing with you." 아저씨, 아저씨. 약간 어이없네요, 채팅. 채팅 어이없네요. 하긴다스 참 맞짱뜬데. 저거 보니까 하긴다스 먹고 싶다. 오케이, 다시 돌아가서. She shut her eyes, reached out her hand, and touched the sleeve. She found a coat, and inside that an emptiness cold as ice. "You scarecrow," she said. Her face lighted. "I ought to be shut up for good," she said with laughter. 이거 했는데. She kicked her foot over the furrow, and with mouth drawn down, shook her head once or twice in a little strutting way. Some husks flew down and whirled into streamers about her skirts. Then she went on, parting her way from side to side with the cane through the whispering field. At last, she came to the end, to a wagon track where the silver grass blew between the red nuts. The quail were walking around like pullets, seeming all dainty and unseen. "Walk pretty," she said. "This is the easy place. This is the easy going." She followed the track, sawing through the quiet bare fields, through the little strings of trees silver in their dead leaves, past cabins silver from weather, with the doors and windows board shut, all like old women under a spell, sitting there. "I'm walking in your deep," she said, nodding her head vigorously. In a raven, she went where a spring was silently flowing through a hollow log. Old Phoenix, bent and dark, drank. "Sweet gum made the water sweet," she said, and drank more. "Nobody know who made this well, for it was here when I was born." The track crossed a swampy part where the moss hung as white as lace from every limb. "Sleep on, the alligators, and blow your bubbles." Then the track went into the road. Deep, deep the road went down between the high green-colored banks. Overhead like oaks, overhead the live oaks met, and it was as dark as a cave. A black dog with a lolling tongue came up out of the weeds by the ditch. Oh my gosh. She was meditating and not ready, and when she came at her, she only hit him a little with her cane. Over she went in the ditch, like a little puff of milkweed. Down there her senses drifted away. A dream visited her, and she reached her hand up, but nothing reached down and gave her a pull. So she lay there and presently went to talking. "Old woman," she said to herself, "that black dog come up out of the weeds to stall you off, and now there he's sitting on his fine tail, smiling at you." A white man finally came along and found her, a hunter, a young man, with his dog on a chain. "Well, Granny," he laughed, "what are you doing here?" "Lying on my back like a June bug." waiting to be fumed over, mister, he said, reaching up her hand. He lifted her up, gave her a swing in the air, and set her down. Anything broken, Granny? No, sir. Then old dead weeds is springy enough, said the phoenix. When she had got her breath, I thank you for your trouble. Where do you live, Granny? He asked, while the two dogs were growling at each other. Away back yonder, sir, behind the ridge. You can't even see it from here. Oh. Your way home? No, sir. I'm going to town. Why? That's too far. That is far as I walk when I come out myself, and I get something for my trouble. He patted the scuffed bag he carried, and there hung down a little clothes cloth. It was one of the bob whites, with its beak hooked bitterly to show. It was dead. Now you go on home, Granny. I bond to go to town, mister, said Phoenix. The time come around. He gave another laugh, filling the whole landscape. I know you old colored people wouldn't miss going to town to see Santa Claus. But something held on Phoenix very still. The deep lines in her face went into fierce and different radiation. Without warning, she had seen with her own eyes a flashing nickel fall out of the man's pocket onto the ground. How old are you, Granny? He was saying. There is no telling, mister, she said. No telling. Then she gave a little cry and clapped her hands and said, Get on away from here, dog. Look at that dog. She laughed as if in admiration. He ain't scared of nobody. He a big black dog, she whispered. Sick him. Watch me get rid of that cur, said the man. Sick him, Petty. Sick him. Phoenix heard the dogs fighting and heard the man running and throwing sticks. She even heard a gunshot, but she was slowly bending forwards by that time. Further and further forward, the lids stretched down over her eyes, as if she were doing this in her sleep. Her chin was lowered almost to her knees. The yellow palm of her hand came out from the fold of her apron. 오케이, 잠깐 물 마시고 쉬어가는 타이밍 좀 가질게요. 아, 제가 자체 뭐라고 해야 되냐, 저거를. 자체 날조하는 거 너무 왜 이렇게 웃기지? 아, 저거 보니까 불닭 먹고 싶어졌어요. 빈속에 불닭 먹으면 체할 텐데, 분명히. 속도 디비지고. 그러네요. 소스를 반밖에 못 넣었는데 어떤 그렇게 슬프게 울던지. 이게 맞나? 이게 맞나? 얼른. 일단은 지금 목이 아파서 조금만 물 좀 마시고 쉬고 잠깐만 트림 나올 뻔했어요. 목 아픈 김에 일이 하자고요? 그러면 이거 읽고 일이 할까? 안 되는데. 안 되는데. 안 되는데. 안 돼요. 오늘 약간 방송 목표는 잔잔한 방송이라서 이제 이러고 이제 이거 방송 끄고 이제 2부 안녕하세요 하고 이제 바로 또 이제 일이 한다. 잠 안 오면. 코가 살짝 막혔어요. 다시 그러면 Her fingers slid down and along the ground. Under the piece of money was the grace and care they would have in lifting an egg from under a setting hen. Since she slowly straightened up, she stood erect, and the nickel was in her apron pocket. A bird flew by, her lips moved. God watching me on the whole time. I come to stealing. The man came back, and his own dog panted about them. Well, I scared him off that time, he said. And then he laughed and lifted his gun and pointed it at Phoenix. She stood straight and faced him. Doesn't the gun scare you? He said, still pointing it. No, sir. I see plenty go off closer by, in my day, and for less than what I done, she said, holding utterly still. He smiled and shouldered the gun. Well, Granny, he said, you must be 100 years old and scared of nothing. I'd give you a dime if I had any money with me, but you take my advice and stay home, and nothing will happen to you. I bad to go on my way, mister, said Phoenix. She inclined her head in the red rag. Then they went in different directions, but she could hear the gun shooting again and again over the hill. She walked on. The shadows hung from the oak trees to the road like curtains. Then she smelled wood smoke and smelled the river, and she saw a steeple and the cabins on their steep steps. Dozens of little black children whirled around her. There ahead was not just shining, bells were ringing. She walked on. In the paved city, it was Christmas time. There were red and green electric lights strung and crisscross everywhere, and all turned on in the daytime. Old Phoenix would have been lost if she had no distrusted her eyesight and depended on her feet to know where to take her. She paused quietly on the sidewalk where people were passing by. A lady came along in the crowd, carrying an armful of red, green, and silver-wrapped presents. She gave off perfume like the red roses in hot summer, and Phoenix stopped her. 아이고야. 필요하기는 단어가 있듯이 악질이라는 단어도 존재할 균형이 맞아요. 약간 악질과 악질과 올해도 좋다고 하시는 분이랑 어느 쪽이든 많이 있으면 악질 선만 안 넘으면 돼. 어디까지 읽었지? 찾았다. Please, Missy, will you lace up my shoe? She held out her foot. What do you want, Grandma? See my shoe, said Phoenix. Do all right for out in the country, but wouldn't look right to go in a big building. Stand still then, Grandma, said the lady. She put her package down on the sidewalk beside her and laced and tied both shoes tightly. Can't lace him with a cane, said Phoenix. Thank you, Missy. I doesn't mind asking a nice lady to tie up my shoe when I get out on the street. Moving slowly and from side to side, She went into the big building and into a tower of steps where she walked up around and around and around until her feet knew to stop. 네라 안녕하세요. 잉글랜드 발음을 해달라고요? 잘 못하는데 한번 도전은 해볼게요. 뭐 그 정도야 뭐 어려운 부탁도 아니고. She entered a door and there she saw nailed up on the wall the document that had been stamped with the gold seal and framed in the gold frame, which matched the dream that was hung up in her head. Here I be, she said. There was a fixed and ceremonial stiffness over her body. A charity case, I suppose, she said an attendant who sat at the desk before her. But Phoenix only looked above her head. There was sweat on her face. The wrinkles in her skin shone like a bright net. Speak up, Grandma, the woman said. What's your name? We must have your history, you know. Have you been here before? What seems to be the trouble with you? Old Phoenix only gave a twitch to her face, as if a fly were bothering her. Are you deaf? Cried the attendant. But then the nurse came in. Oh, that's just old Aunt Phoenix, she said. She doesn't come for herself. She had a little grandson. She makes her these strips just as regular as clockwork. She lifts away back off the old mattress trays. She bent down. Well, Auntie Phoenix, why don't you just take a seat? We won't keep you standing after your long trip, she pointed. The old woman sat down, bolt uprighting in the chair. Now, how is the boy? Asked the nurse. Old Phoenix did not speak. I said, how is the boy? But Phoenix only waited and started straight ahead. Her face was very solemn, withdrawn into rigidity. Is his throat any better? Asked the nurse. Aunt Phoenix, don't you hear me? Is your grandson's throat any better since the last time you came from the medicine? With her hands on her knees, and the old woman waited, silent, erect and motionless, just as if she were in armor. You mustn't take up a time this way, Aunt Phoenix, the nurse said. Tell us quickly about your grandson and get it over. He isn't dead, is he? At last, there came a flicker and then a flame of comprehension across her face as she spoke. My grandson. 이건 다르게 읽어봐야겠다. My grandson, it was my memory that had left me. There I sat and forgot why I made my long trip. Forgot, the nurse frowned. After you came so far. The Phoenix was like an old woman begging a dignified forgiveness for walking up, frightened in the night. I never did go to school. I was too old to surrender, she said in a soft voice. I am an old woman without an education. It was my memory failed me. My little grandson, he is just the same, and I forgot in the coming. Throat never heals, does it? Said the nurse, speaking in a loud, shrill voice to old Phoenix. By now, she had a card with something written on it, a little list. Yes, swallowed I. When was it? January, 2-3 years ago. Phoenix spoke and asked now. Nah, Missy, he not dead. He's just the same. Every little while his throat being to close up again, and he not able to swallow. He not get his breath. He not able to help himself. So the time come around, and I go on another trip for the soothing medicine. 이게 제가 중간에 약간 흑인 분들 말투 있잖아요. 약간 그거 따라하는 게 그 중간에 피닉스라는 친구가 흑인 친구라서 뭔가 약간 영국의 그 고급스러운 발음이 좀 덜 어울리지 않을까 싶어서 놀래라, 놀래라, 놀래라. 아, 잠깐만, 놀래라. 아, 죄송해요. 아, 엘류신님, 나나나나 어서오세요. 아, 방송 고생하셨습니다. 난민분들 어서오세요. 아, 엘류신님 방송 고생하셨습니다. 아, 나나나나, 네, 토큰 우다비님, 나나나나 어서오세요. 방송 고생하셨습니다. 제가 지금 어차피 그냥 단순 저택진을 위한 그거 해드리는 건데 제가 하필 지금 뭘 진행 중이게 있어서 안녕하세요. 네, 일려신님 방송 고생하셨고 난민분들도 어서오세요. 나나나나. 네, 저는 게임을 저는 버추얼려 엘류라고 하고요. 지금은 이제 약간 좀 들으면서 잘 수 있도록 뭔가 영어 책 읽는 방송을 하고 있었습니다. 네. 그래서 조금 잔잔하고 조금 어찌 보면 노잼인 방송이 될 수가 있거든요. 될 수도 있고 안 될 수도 있고. 그래서 네. 네, 그렇습니다. 그래서 좀 재밌게 없게 느껴질 수 있지만 지금은 현재 그런 방송 중이고 원래는 게임 이런저런 거 많이 하니까 혹시 나중에 또 관심이 생긴다면 보러 와주신다면 감사하겠습니다. 감사합니다. 나나나나나나나나 나나나나나나나 나나나나나나나나나나나나나나나나 네, 난민분들 다시 한번 어서 오세요. 아, 잠깐만, 나 목 아파. 이게 목이 물리적으로 아파요. 아무튼 그래서 영어 발음이 오랜만에 약간 영국식 발음이 오랜만에 하니까 나오긴 나오는 게 조금 신기하긴 하네요, 스스로도. 약간 뭐라 해야 되지? 약간 영국 발음으로 프리토킹을 하려고 하면 못하는데 뭔가 이렇게 책 읽는 거는 또 잘 돼요. 신기하죠? 오케이, 그럼 다시 돌아가서 읽도록 하겠습니다. Phoenix spoke and asked now, "No, Missy, he not dead. He just the same. Every little while, his throat being too close up again, and he not able to swallow. He not get his breath. He not able to help himself. So the time come around, and I go on another trip with the soothing medicine. All right, the doctor said, as long as he came to get it. You could have it, said the nurse, but it's an obstinate case. My little grandson, he sat up there in the house all wrapped up, waiting by himself." Phoenix went on. "We is the only two left in the world. He suffered, and it don't seem to put him back at all. He got a sweet lick. He going to last." He wear a little patch quilt and peeked out, holding his mouth open like a little bird. "I remembers. It's so plain now. I'm not going to forget him again. Now, the whole enduring time, I could tell him from all the others in creation." "All right," the nurse was trying to hush her now. She bought her a bottle of medicine. "Charity," she said, making a check mark in a book. Old Phoenix held the bottle close to her eyes and then carefully put it into her pocket. "I thank you," she said. "It's Christmas time, Grandma," said the attendant. "Could I give you a few pennies out of my purse?" 5 pennies is a nickel," said Phoenix stiffly. "Here's a nickel," said the attendant. Phoenix rose carefully and held out her hand. She received her nickel and then finished the other nickel out of her pocket and laid it beside the new one. She stared at her palm closely, with her head on one side. Then she gave a tap with her cane on the floor. "This is what come to me to do," she said. "I going to the store and buy my child a little windmill they sells, made out of a paper. He going to find it hard to believe there's such a thing in the world. I'll march myself back where he waiting, holding it straight up in his hand. She left her free hand, gave her little nod, turned around and walked out of the doctor's office. Then her slow step began on her stairs, going down. 네, 이렇게 해서 첫 번째 단편 이름이 뭐였지? 맞아, The Warren Pass이라고 Warren Pass이라고 그 학교에서 수업할 때 배운 거긴 한데 좀 여운이 많이 나는 작품이고 이게 계절적 시간적 배경이 딱 이제 겨울쯤이어갖고 생각나서 그리고 무엇보다 제가 요즘 최근에 배운 작품들 중에 그 N 월드가 안 들어가는 작품이어서 웬일로 이게 미국 근현대 소설들이 어쩔 수가 없는 게 N 월드가 되게 아무렇지 않게 간간히 들어가서 깜짝깜짝 놀라게 돼서 그나마 안 들어가 있던 걸로 기억하고 있는 작품을 찾았는데 약간 니그로라고 나름 순화라고 하는 게 맞나? 욕 형태로는 안 들어갔네요. 욕한 형태로 안 들어갔으면 된 거지. 그게 맞나 싶긴 하지만 아무튼 그러하다 하고 어디 갔니? 두 번째를 뭘로 할까? 두 번째를 어디 갔지? 여기 있다. 잠깐만요. 좀 살짝 걸릴 것 같아요. 여기 이런 방송인가요? 아니 그 글은 스트리머는 제가 없습니다. 스트리머는 제가 없어요. 스트리머는 제가 없어요. 아마도. 네, 찾았다. 그 두 번째로 읽을 거는 이거는 작품 소개를 좀 살짝 짚고 가는 게 괜찮을 것 같은 게 이거는 제가 찾아봤었을 때 영어 원서도 있고 이거 한국 번안본이 있던 걸로 기억하거든요. 이거 뭐지? 혹시 이거 원서 듣고 관심 있으신 분 계시면 그 포털 사이트에다가 나의 안토니아라고 검색해서 한번 보는 게 좋을 것 같아요. 한번 보는 게 좋을 것 같아요. 조금 약간 어떻게 얘기하는 게 좋을까? 되게 진짜 막 엄청 재밌다라는 느낌은 아니긴 한데 약간 좀 뭐라 해야 되지? 누군가의 일상을 한 명을 중심으로 주변에 일어나는 일과 일상을 약간 CCTV를 글로 옮긴 느낌이긴 한데 약간 거기서 이제 생각을 좀 많이 할 수 있는 작품이라서 좋아하고 약간 좀 힐링이 되는 느낌이어서 들고 와봤습니다. 네, 윌라 캐더의 나의 안토니아, 윌라 캐서's My Antonia. 두 번째 시작하도록 하겠습니다. Willa Cather, My Antonia. Last summer, I happened to be crossing the plains of Loa in a season of intense heat, and it was my good fortune to have for traveling companion James Quill Burton, Jim Burton, as we still call him in the West. He and I are old friends. We grew up together in the same Nebraska town, and we've had much to say to each other while the train flashed through never-ending miles of bright wheat, the country, towns and bright flowered pastures and oak groves, wilting in the sun. We sat in the observation car where the woodwork was hot. Oh, oh. He and I are old friends. We grew up together in the same Nebraska town, and we had much to say to each other. While the train flashed through never-ending miles of ripe wheat, by country towns and bright flowers of pastures and oak groves, wilting in the sun, we sat in the of our observation car, where the woodwork was hot to the touch, and red dust lay deep over everything. The dust and heat, the burning wind, reminded us of many things. We were talking about what it is like to spend one's childhood in little towns like these, buried in wheat and corn, under assimilating extremes of climate, burning summers when the world lies green and billowy beneath a brilliant sky, when one is fairly stifled in vegetation, and the color and smell of strong weeds and heavy harvests, blustery winters with little snow, when the whole country is stripped bare and grey as sheet iron. We agreed that no one who had not grown up in the little prairie world town could know anything about it. It was a kind of Freemasonry, we said. 잠깐만 물 마시고 올게요 지금. 물 좀 마셔야겠다. 지금 쉬고 있으니까 지금 이 타이밍 쉬고 있으니까 이 타이밍을 틈타서 악질탱이 치겠다. 똑똑한데요. 잠깐만요. 저 난방 좀 켜고 올게요. 조금 춥다. 뭐야 캠 왜 이래? 됐다. 잠시만요. 검은깨 드레스님 네 안녕하세요. 오케이 됐다 준비됐다. 그러면 다시 읽도록 하겠습니다. When also Jim Burden and I both live in New York and are old friends, I do not see much of him there. He is legal counsel for one of the great Western railways and is summoned always from his New York office for weeks together. That is one reason why we do not often meet. Another is that I do not like his wife. When Jim was still an obscure young liar, struggling to make his way in New York, his career was suddenly advanced by a brilliant marriage. Guinevere Whitney was the only daughter of a distinguished man. Her marriage with young Burden was the subject of sharp comment at her time. It was said she had been brutally jilted by her cousin, Rutland Whitney, and that she married this unknown man from the West out of bravado, She was a restless, headstrong girl, even then, who liked to astonish her friends. Later, when I knew her, she was always doing something unexpected. She gave one of her town houses for a suffrage headquarters, produced one of her own plays at the Princess Theatre, was arrested for picketing during a garment maker's strike act. I am never able to believe that she had much feeling for the causes to which she lends her name and her fleeting interest. She is handsome, energetic, executive, but to me, she seems unimpressible and temperamentally incapable of enthusiasm. Her husband's quiet tastes irritate her, I think, and she finds it worthwhile to play the patroness to a group of young poets and painters of advanced ideas and metaphor ability. She has her own fortune and lives her own life. For some reason, she wishes to remain Mrs. James Burton. 오케이. 잠깐만 일시 정지하고 물 좀 마시고. 부대찌개는 맛있다니 어서오세요. 네라네라 안녕하세요. 목소리가 좋으시네요. 감사합니다. 이제 영어 듣기 평가 방송. 수학이다. 영어 듣기 얘기하니까. As for Jim, no disappointments have been severe enough to chill his naturally romantic and ardent disposition. This disposition, so often made him seem very funny when he was a boy, has been one of the strongest elements in his success. He loves with a personal passion in the great country through which his railway runs and branches. His faith in it and his knowledge of it have played an important part in its development. He is always able to raise capital for new enterprises in Wyoming or Montana, and has helped young men out there to do remarkable things in mines and timber and oil. If a young man with an idea can once get Jim Burton's attention, can manage to accompany him when he goes off in the wilds hunting for lost parks or exploring new canyons, then the money, which means action, is usually forthcoming. Jim is still able to lose himself in those big Western dreams, though he is over 40 now. He meets new people and new enterprises with the impulsiveness by which his boyhood friend. Remember him. He never seems to me grow older. His fresh color and sandy hair, quick changing blue eyes are those of a young man, and a sympathetic, salacious interest in women is as useful as it is Western and America. During that burning day, when we were crossing Loa, our talk kept returning to a central figure. 너무 작다. 됐다. Figure. 어디 갔지? 됐다, 찾았다. A bohemian girl whom we had known long ago, and whom both of us admired more than any person we remembered. This girl seemed to mean us the country, the conditions, the whole adventure of our childhood. To speak her name was to call up pictures of people and places to set a quiet drama going in one's brain. 뭐야 이거? 됐다. I had lost sight of her altogether, but Jim had found her again after long years, had renewed a friendship that meant a great deal to him, and out of his busy life had stepped apart time enough to enjoy that friendship. His mind was full of her that day. He made me see her again, feel her presence, revived all of my old affection for her. I can't see, he said impetuously, why you have never written anything about Antonia. I told him I had always felt that other people, he himself, for one knew he much better than I was ready, however, to make an agreement with him. I would set down on paper all that I remembered of Antonia. If he would do the same, we might, in this way, get the picture of her. He rumpled his hair with a quiet, excited gesture, which with him often announces a new determination, and I could see that my suggestion took hold of him. Maybe I will, he declared. He stared out of the window for a few moments, and when he turned to me again, his eyes had the sudden clearness that comes from something the mind itself sees. Of course, he said, I should have to do it in a direct way and say a great deal about myself. It's through myself that I knew and felt her, and I have no practice in any other form of presentation. I told him that how he knew her and felt her was exactly what I most wanted to know about Antonia. He had opportunities that I, as a little girl who watched him come and go, had not. 잠깐만, 물 마시면서 좀 쉬어갈게요. 이거 뭐라고 해야 되지? 그 중간에 되게 좋은 뭐라 해야 되지? 그러니까 나의 안토니아라는 책이 그러니까 되게 어떤 책인지를 설명해줘 왜 나의 안토니아인지를 설명해주는 구절이 있단 말이에요. 이게 엄청 이거를 보고 엄청 감명받아서 제가 이제 야 이거는 여러분들께 다 보여줘야 된다라는 마음으로 책을 샀어요. 어디 갔지? 그래야 되지? 어디 갔지? 잠깐만. 사라졌다. 잠깐만. 이거 분명히 이거 형광펜으로 칠해놨는데 이북이긴 하지만 찾았다. 우리가 기억하는 다른 그 누구보다도 우리에게는 그 여자애가 바로 그 시골이고 그 상황이고 그 시절의 모든 모험을 의미했다. 그러니까 나의 안토니아라는 거잖아요. 근데 여기서 말하는 나의 안토니아라는 게 나의 시골, 나의 추억, 나의 어린 날의 추억 그런 식으로 치환이 가능하니까 되게 그러니까 이게 제가 책을 다 읽어서 이렇게 얘기할 수 있는 거긴 한데 아무튼 한번 읽어보세요. 약간 조금 세상에 치이는데 지쳤다면 개인적으로 추천합니다. 나 어디까지 읽었더라? 어라? 나 어디까지 읽었더라? 잠깐 잠깐만요. 나 어디까지 읽었더라? 오라. 잠깐만, 안 되는데. 오라. 어. Myself for New York and I have no practice any representation. Beneath the eye, a little girl who watched her come and go and not. 잠깐만요. 이거 뭐 다시 읽지 뭐. I told him that how he knew her and felt her was exactly what I most wanted to know about Antonia. Yet, 이게 읽었구나. Had opportunities that I, as the little girl who watched her come and go, had not. Months after Jim Burton arrived at my apartment one stormy winter afternoon with a bulging legal portfolio sheltered under his fur overcoat, he brought it into the sitting room with him and tapped it with some pride as he stood warming in his hands. I finished it last night, the thing about Antonia, he said. Now, what about yours? I had to confess that mine had not gone beyond a few straggling notes. Notes? I didn't make any. He drank his tea all at once and put down the cup. I didn't arrange or rearrange. I simply wrote down of what of herself and myself and other people Antonia's name recalls to me. I suppose it hasn't any form. It hasn't any title either. He went into the next room, sat down at my desk and wrote on the pinkish face of the portfolio the word Antonia. He frowned at this a moment, then prefixed another word, making it my Antonia. That seemed to satisfy him. Read it as soon as you can, he said, rising, but don't let it influence your own story. My own story was never written, but the following narrative is Jim's manuscript, substantially as he brought it to me. 오케이, 둘, 셋. 마이크가 뽑혔어요. 마이크가 잠깐 뽑혔습니다. 놀자님들 안녕하세요. 이거 책 어제 지금 읽는 거를 어떻게 진행할 건지 대해서 얘기를 하고 있었거든요. 잠깐만요. 속이 더부룩해서 잠깐만요. 일단은 그래서 어떻게 스노우판서원님 안녕하세요. 어서오세요. 여러분들 안녕하세요. 오늘은 몇 시까지 하시나요? 몇 시는 특별히 정해놓진 않긴 했는데 잠깐만요. 일단은 이 작품 다 읽은 때까지 한 1시간 정도 걸릴 것 같단 말이죠. 그래서 이거 다 읽은 다음에 읽은 다음에 한번 다시 시간을 봐야 될 것 같은데, 그렇게 되면 최소한 3시 반까지는 하지 않을까 싶네요. 그러면 말씀한 대로 물 좀 떠오도록 하겠습니다. 다녀올게요. 다녀왔습니다. 왔어요. 오케이. 일단은 리마인드용으로 다시 한번 말씀드리자면, 현재 읽고 있는 책은 나의 안토니아 웰러 카터의 책을 일부분 원서로 읽고 있는데, 혹시 관심 있으신 분들은 나의 안토니아 검색하면 될 것 같아요. 감사합니다. Okay, let's go. Chapter 2, Mrs. Harling. 헉. 헉. Chapter 2, Mrs. Harling. Grandmother often said that if she had to live in town, she thanked God she lived next to Harlings. They had been farming people like ourselves, and their place was like a little farm with a big barn and a garden and an orchard and grazing lots, even a windmill. The Harlings were Norwegians, and Mrs. Harling had lived in Christiania until she was 10 years old. Her husband was born in Minnesota. He was a grain merchant and cattle buyer, and was generally considered the most enterprising businessman in her country. He controlled a line of grain elevators into little towns along the railroad to the west of us, and was away from home a great deal. In his absence, his wife was the head of the household. 잠깐만 물 좀 마실게요. 좀 더 물 좀만 더 마셔야겠다. Mrs. Harling's was short and square and steady looking, like her house. Every inch of her was charged with an energy that made itself felt the moment she entered the room. Her face was rosy and solid, with bright twinkling eyes and a stubborn little chin. She was quick to anger, quick to laughter, and jolly from the depths of her soul. How will I remember her laugh? It had in it the same sudden recognition that flashed into her eyes, was a burst of humor, short and intelligent. Her rapid footsteps shook her own floors, and she rooted lassitude and indifference wherever she came. She could not be negative or perfunctory about anything. Her enthusiasm and her violent likes and dislikes asserted themselves in all the everyday occupations of life. Wash day was interesting, never dreary, as her Harling's. Preserving time was a prolonged festival, and the house cleaning was like a revolution. When Mrs. Harling made garden that spring, we could feel the stir of her undertaking, though the willow hedge that separated our places from hers. Book 4, Chapter 1. I lay awake for a long time, until the slow-moving moon passed my windows of its way up the heavens. I was thinking about Antonia and her children, about Anna, solitude for her, Ambrosch gave affection, Leo's jealous animal little love. That moment, when they all came tumbling out of the cave into the light, was a sign any man might have come far to see. Antonia had always been one to leave images in the mind that did not fade, that grew stronger with time. In my memory, there was a succession of such pictures, fixed there like the old woodcuts of one's first primer. Antonia kicking her bare legs against the sides of my pony when we came home in triumph with our snake. Antonia in her back shawl and fur cap as she stood by her father's grave in the snowstorm. Antonia coming in with her work team along the evening skyline. 감사합니다. 저 영국식 발음도 가능해요. She led herself to immemorial human attitudes which we recognize by instinct as universal and true. I had not been mistaken. She was a battered woman now, not a lovely girl, but she still had that something which fires the imagination, could still stop one's breath for a moment by a look or gesture that somehow revealed the meaning in common sights. She had only to stand up in the orchard, to put her hands on a little crab tree, and look up at the apples to make you feel the godness of planting and tending and harvesting at last. All the strong things of her heart came out in her body that had been so tireless in serving generous emotions. It was no wonder that her son stood tall and straight. She was a rich man of life, like the founders of early races. 이렇게도 가능하다. 숨은 섭지? 오케이. 아, 기지개 시원하다. 으. 하고 일단은 안토니아는 이제 마지막 부분까지 발췌해온 부분 중에 마지막 부분이에요. 마지막 장면. 잠깐만 물 좀 우리요. 내 서사시는 아니지만 마지막 부분을 읽기 전에 잠깐만 물 좀 마시는 시간을 가져보도록 하겠습니다. 페펫 해달라고요? 잠깐만요. 넘어가요. 손모가지를 내가 어디다 뒀더라. 제가 손모가지를 어디다 놨을까요? 이게 살짝 정신없긴 한데. 하나, 둘, 셋. 넘어가요. 막 이미 근데 하지만 이미 하고 왔는걸요? 어쩔 수 없다 이거는. 일단은 그럼 다시 해보도록 하겠습니다. Book 5, Chapter 3, the last scene. I took a long walk north of the town, out into the pastures where the land was so rough that it had never been plowed up, and the long red grass of early times still grew shaggy over the draws and the hillocks. Out there, I feel at home again. Overhead, the sky was set in indescribable blue of autumn, bright and shadowless, hard as enamel. To the south, I could see the dun-shaded river bluffs that used to look so big to me, and all about stretched, dying cornfields of the pale gold color I remembered so well. Russian crystals were blowing across the uplands and piling against the wire fences like barricades. Along the cattle paths, the plums of goldenrod were already fading into some warmed velvet, gray with gold threads in it. I had escaped from the curious depression that hangs over little towns. My mind was full of pleasant things, trips I mean to take with the Cossack boys in the Badlands and up on the stinking water. There were enough Cossacks to play with for a long while yet. Even after the boys grew up, there would always be Cossack himself. I meant to tramp along a few miles of lighted streets with Cossack. As I wandered over those rough pastures, I had the good luck to stumble upon a bit of the first road that went from Black Hawk out to the North Country to my grandfather's farm, then on to the Shimras and to the Norwegian settlements. Everywhere else it had been plowed and under, whereas a highway was surveyed. This half-mile or so was in the pasture. Fence was all that was left on that old road, which used to run like a wild thing across the open prairie, clinging to the high places and circling and doubling like a rabbit before the hounds. On the level land, tracks had almost disappeared, were mere shadings in the grass, and a stranger would not have noticed them. But wherever the road had crossed a draw, it was easy to find. The rains that made channels of the real ruts and watched them so deeply that the sod had never healed over them. They looked like gashes torn by a grizzly's claws on the slopes where the farm wagons used to lurch up out the hollows with a pull that brought curling muscles on the smooth hips of their horses. I sat down and watched the haystacks turn rosy in the slanting sunlight. This was the road over which Antonia and I came on that night when we got off the train at Black Hawk and were bedded down in the straw. Wandering children, being taken we knew not well, sir. I had only to close my eyes to hear the rumbling of the wagon in the dark, and to be again overcome by that obliterating strangeness. The feelings of that night were so near that I could reach out and touch them with my hand. I had the sense of coming home to myself, and of having found of what a little circles man's experience is. For Antonia and for me, this had been the road of destiny, had taken us to those early accidents of fortune, with predetermined for us all that we can ever be. Now I understood that the same road was to bring us together again. Whatever we had missed, we possessed together the precious, the incommunicable past. The end. 아우레오씨님, 네, 안녕하세요. 잠깐만요. 이 타이밍에 한번 기스개만 살짝 피고 할게요. 잠깐. 잠깐 방금 기스개를 켜려고 뒤를 허리에 힘 빡 주고 스트레칭 하다가 허리 삐끗할 뻔했어. 그래요. 그럴 수 있지. 근데 방제가 그렇잖아요. 방제 보고 또 그렇게 정지되면 어쩔 수 없는 거지. 그럴 수 있지. 일단은 지금 원서 읽는 거는 살짝만 좀 쉬어가는 시간을 가지도록 할게요. 지금 다음으로 읽을 거를 조금 고민하고 있는데, 지금 여러 가지 선택지가 있는데, 여러 가지인가? 아니네, 여러 가지도 아니네. 여러 가지긴 한데 여러 가지가 아니에요. 그 위대한 개츠비 아시는 분 계세요 혹시? 어디 갔지? 수민님, 네, 안녕하세요. 그대의 눈동자에 치여서 그건데, 지금 제가 그 발췌해온 친구들 지금 보고 있는데, 그 장면이라고 해야 되나? 그거를 묘사를 한 원서 부분이 있단 말이에요. 그래서 이거랑 포함해서 조금 뭐라고 해야 되지? 이거 포함해서 좀 읽어볼까? 고민하고 있어요, 좀 살짝. 잠깐만요. 내가 얘를 어디다가 내가 스크랩을 어디다가 했지? 잠깐만요. 이거를 GIF 화질 좋은 게 없네요, 의외로. 아깝다. 그나마 화질 좋은 자리 없어. 이미지 열기. 되면서 이미지 열기. 됐다. 이거 하면 되겠다. 안녕하세요. 아까 다시 인사하러 와주셔서 고마워요. 안녕하세요. 음. 음. 되나 이거? GIF? GIF는 안 보이는구나. 아닌가? 됐다. 이거. 정말 혹시나 약간 이게 그 미디어 개츠비 거기서 온 걸 모르는 분들이 생각보다 계시더라고요. 네, 여기다 얹어놔야지. 진짜 안 어울린다. 잠깐만요. 이거 어디 있을까? 진짜 어디 갔지? 이거 하고 싶은데 배가 고프네. 배고픈데 야식 추천받습니다. 귤 있고요. 귤 있고 고구마 있고요. 나 귤 먹어야겠다. 고구마는 너무 더 부를게요. 고구마요? 그러면 이거 다 읽고 고구마 갖고 오겠습니다. 읽는 동안에는 귤을 먹고 다 먹은 다음에는 고구마를 들고 오도록 할게요. 근데 좀 약간 좀 더부룩해도 뭔가 속 채우는 게 필요하긴 해서 고구마 맛있어요. 어. 잠깐만요. 배고파. 진짜 배고프긴 한가 보다. 찾았다. 찾았다. 오케이, 그러면 Gatsby. 아닌가, 잠깐만요. 어라? 있었는데요. 어, 있었는데요. 너무 집착하는 건가? 너무 집착한다. 아이고. 잠깐만, 그러면 야식 좀 갖고 올게요. 마이크 끄고 얘기하고 있었구나. 찾았어요. 개츠비 저거. 저거. 그러니까 지금 제가 지금 서술을 하려는 부분이 영화 스크립트로 돼 있거든요. 이거 보여드릴 수 있으면 유튜브 영상 있을지 모르겠는데 이거 보여드릴게요. 이거 진짜로. 나 개인적으로 엄청 그 묘사랑 뭐라 해야 되지? 묘사랑 그 상황이랑 저 예술 그 CG라던가 엄청 개인적으로 개츠비한테 묘사하는 장면인데 개인적으로 엄청 좋아하는 장면이어서 일단은 하고 하겠습니다. 음. 어 The Great Gatsby. Chapter 3. Gatsby sent over his chauffeur with an invitation. For a moment, he looked at me as if he failed to understand. I'm Gatsby, he said suddenly. What? I exclaimed. Oh, I beg your pardon. I thought you knew, old sport. I'm afraid I'm not a very good host. He smiled understandingly. Much more than understandingly. It was one of those rare smiles with the quality of eternal reassure in it that you may come across 4 or 5 times in life. It faced, or seemed to face, the whole eternal world for an instant, and then concentrated on you with an irresistible prejudice in your favor. It understood you just as far as you wanted to be understood, believe in you as you would like to believe in yourself, and assured you that it had precisely an impression of you that, as your best, you hoped to convey. Precisely at that year or two over 30, whose elaborate formulae of speech just missed being absurd. Sometimes before he introduced himself, I got a strong impression that he was picking his words at care. 이게 어디 갔네? 여기 넣었구나. 그래서 이제 이게 지금 이게 그 서술이란 말이에요. 찾았다. 제가 묘사한 장면이 잠깐만요. 일단 광고 남기고 이거를 약간 조금 씹덕 같긴 한데요. 씹덕 오타쿠 같긴 한데요. 좀 알아줬으면 좋겠다는 생각을 해서 어디 갔지? 하고 여기서 이쪽으로 옮긴 다음에 이렇게 캡처. 여기 있다. 이거 그걸로 나오는구나. 개츠비 잘 장면만 있는 데가 없네. 아깝다. 개츠비. 저 서술까지가 진도백인데. 서술까지가 여기 됐다. 찾았다. 이게 첫 장면, 처음 만난 장면이에요. 주인공이랑 개츠비랑. 와.
His smile was one of those rare smiles that you may come across 4 or 5 times in life. It seemed to understand you and believe in you, just as you would like to be understood and believed in.
Sorry, old sport, I thought you knew. Please, just... I don't know what to say, please.
이상 십덕에 좀 십덕 이런 거 좋아한다고 십덕이로 하는 게 맞는지 모르겠는데 아무튼 네, 좀 오타쿠에 이거 여러분도 다 알아줬으면 좋겠다. 의 그런 발작 같은 무언가였습니다. 감사합니다. 또 어디 해야 되지? 아, 맞아. 그 마지막 처음 장면 보여줬으니까 마지막 장면도 좋아한단 말이에요. 마지막 장면이 Chapter 7, last scene. Was Daisy driving? Yes, he said after a moment. But of course I'll say I was, you see. When we left New York, she was very nervous and she thought it would steady her to drive. And this woman rushed out at us just as we were passing a car coming the other way. It all happened in the minute, but it seemed to me that she wanted to speak to us, so we were somebody she knew. Well, first Daisy turned away from the woman towards the car, and then she lost her nerve and turned back. The second my hand reached the wheel, I felt the shock. It must have killed her instantly. Daisy and Tom were sitting opposite each other at the kitchen table, with a plate of cold fried chicken between them, and 2 bottles of ale. He was talking intently across the table at her, and in his earnestness, his hand had fallen upon and covered her own. Once in a while she looked up at him and nodded in agreement. They weren't happy, and neither of them had touched the chicken or the ale. And yet they weren't unhappy either. There was an unmistakable air of natural intimacy about the picture, and anybody would have said that they were conspiring together. As I tiptoed from the porch, I heard my taxi feeling its way along the dark drive towards the house. Gatsby was waiting where I had left him in his drive. Is it all quiet up there? He asked anxiously. Yes, it's all quiet, I hesitated. You better come home and get some sleep. He shook his head. I want to wait here till Daisy goes to bed. Good night, old sport. He put his hand in his coat pockets and turned back eagerly to his scrutiny of the house, as though my presence mirrored the scaredness of the vigil. So I walked away and left him standing there in the moonlight, watching over nothing. 이제 살짝 스포일러인데 이제 이 장면을 마지막으로 개츠비는 리타이어 합니다. 이 책에서 뭐 죽을 수도 있고 아니면 멀리 이사를 갔을 수도 있고 아니면 어딘가를 떠났을 수도 있고 어떻게 리타이어 했는지는 안 알려줄 거예요. 하고 다음이 이제 마지막 장이에요. Chapter 9, the last page. On the last night, with my trunk packed and my car sold to the grocer, I went over and looked at the huge and coherent failure of her house once more. on the white steps an absence word, scrawled by some boy with a piece of brick, stood out clearly in the moonlight, and I erased it, drawing my shear raspingly along the stone. Then I wandered down to the beach and sprawled out on the sand. Most of the big shores places were closed now, and there were hardly any lights except the shadowy, moving glow of a ferryboat across the sound. As the moon rose higher, and the essential 됐다. 됐다. Until gradually I became aware of the old island here that flowered once for Dutch sailors' eyes, a fresh green breast of the new world. Its vanished trees, the trees that had made way for Gatsby's house, had once pandered in whispers to the last and greatest of all human dreams, for a transitory and enchanted moment man must have held his breath in the presence of this continent, compelled into an ascetic contemplation he neither understood or nor desired, face to face for the last time in history with something commensurate to his capacity for wonder. And as I sat there brooding on the old unknown world, I thought of Gatsby's wonder when he first picked out the green light at the end of Daisy's dock. He had come a long way to this blue lawn, and his dream must have seemed so close, like he could hardly fail to grasp it. He did not know that it was already behind him, somewhere back in that vast obscurity beyond the city, where the dark fields of the Republic rolled on under the night. Gatsby believed in the green light, so our orgastic future that year by year ceased before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch our arms farther, and no fine morning. So we beat on. Both again the current rode back ceaselessly into the past. The end. 네, 그렇게 됩니다. 일이 하나요? 와, 진짜 완전 일이 악질이시네요. 잠깐만요. 잠깐만 좀 다녀올게요. 넘어가요. 안녕하세요. 들켜버렸다. 농담이고, 일단은 오늘 방송은 잠깐만, 나 왜 화면 어딨다. 화면 됐다. 일단은 지금 목이 생각보다 꽤 아픈 관계로 오늘 방송은 여기서 마무리를 하도록 할게요. 오늘 방송 다들 보러 와주셔서 감사하고 네, 여기서 마무리하도록 하겠습니다. 오늘 좀 테스트 방송이고 조금 이제 못 알아들을 것 같았는데도 다들 와주셔서 정말 여러모로 많이 감사드리고요. 네, 여기서 방송 마무리하도록 하고 이터널 리턴을 마시는 분이 계시네요, 마침. 이분께 호스팅 남겨드리고 저는 오늘 방송을 마무리하도록 하겠습니다. 전 들어가 볼게요. 넬바, 오리오스님 넬바, 댕백카님 넬바, 놀자연님 넬바, 스노우 팬슬원님 넬바, 제스백신님 넬바, 라서미님 넬바, 가야지님 넬바, 부대찌개는 말싸님 넬바, 그리고 제가 미처 인사드리지 못한 여러분들께 넬바, 내일 봐요. 안녕.